A young mother kissed her husband goodbye, played with her children, and went about an ordinary autumn day in 1961. Hours later, her baby was found alone, her kitchen splattered with blood. And Joan Risch was gone. No body, no answers. Only chilling clues. A trail that led nowhere. For more than 60 years, her family, neighbors, and even America itself have asked the same haunting question. What really happened to Joan Risch? It was October of 1961 in Lincoln, Massachusetts. The leaves were turning red and gold, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. This was New England, where the neighborhoods were quiet, the homes neatly kept, and life seemed safe, predictable. Even idyllic. In one of those tidy homes lived a 31-year-old woman named Joan Carolyn Risch. On the surface, Joan had everything the young wife and mother could want. She was married to Martin Risch, a successful executive in the publishing industry. They had 2 young children, Lillian, age 4, and David, just 2 years old. Their home at 75 Old Bedford Road was warm, filled with books, toys, and the laughter of children. Neighbors described Joan as elegant, intelligent, and friendly. A woman who kept her home spotless, cared deeply for her children, and seemed devoted to her husband. To anyone looking in, she was the picture of the American dream. What few people knew was that Joan carried shadows from her past. As a child, her own home had been destroyed by fire. Her parents died young, leaving Joan to grow up in foster care. Despite these early tragedies, Joan had built a good life for herself. She earned a degree in English literature. She worked in publishing before leaving her job to raise her children. But those who knew her well said she sometimes carried a quiet sadness, a heaviness she never spoke of. In the weeks before her disappearance, Joan had been checking out books from the library. Strange books about murder mysteries, about missing women, and even about real-life disappearances. To anyone else, it might have been harmless curiosity, but in hindsight, it seemed almost like foreshadowing. Was Joan simply an avid reader, or was she studying something darker? That Tuesday began like any other. Martin left early for a business trip to New York. Joan made breakfast for Lillian and David, kissed her husband goodbye, and went about her routine. She took her daughter to nursery school, returned home, and chatted briefly with neighbors. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that this would be the last day anyone would ever see Joan alive. Around midday, Joan served lunch to her children. She then borrowed a neighbor's phone book to make a few calls. Later, she put David down for a nap and let Lillian play outside. It was an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary suburb, but sometime between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m., the ordinary became extraordinary. And Joan Risch simply vanished. When Martin returned home that evening, he would find a scene so strange, so haunting, that it still baffles investigators more than 60 years later. There was blood in the kitchen, blood on the walls, blood leading out the door, and yet no Joan. Only her baby son crying in his crib, and her little daughter left outside, waiting for a mother who would never come back. What happened inside that quiet home in Massachusetts? Murder? Kidnapping? Or something far more mysterious? The disappearance of Joan Risch had begun when Martin Risch returned home from his business trip on the evening of October 24, 1961. He expected to walk into his warm, familiar home. He expected to be greeted by Joan, maybe with the smell of dinner cooking, and his 2 children running toward him. Instead, he walked into a nightmare, 4-year-old Lillian was playing outside when a neighbor noticed something odd. The little girl seemed confused, saying, "Mommy's gone, and there's red paint in the kitchen." Inside, 2-year-old David was crying in his crib, alone for hours. It was already dusk, and there was no sign of Joan. Martin rushed inside, and what he found was chilling. The kitchen was smeared with blood. Drops, smears, and large stains marked the floor, the walls, and the phone. On the counter sat an overturned telephone, and on the floor, a phone book left open. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken dishes, no forced entry. But the blood told a different story. Investigators later noted something even stranger. A trail of blood drops led from the kitchen, through the house, out the back door, and into the driveway, and then it simply stopped. There was no body, no weapon, no explanation. It was as if Joan had bled, walked out of the house, and then vanished into thin air. Several other strange details emerged. A kitchen towel and Joan's apron were missing. A box of empty beer bottles was found in the garage. Even though Joan didn't drink, the neighbors reported a strange blue car parked nearby earlier that afternoon. One witness thought they saw a disoriented woman, possibly Joan, walking along the road, holding something in her arms, but no one could confirm it for certain. And then detectives discovered something eerie. The very books Joan had borrowed from the library in the weeks before she disappeared were about women who had vanished, leaving bloodstains behind, almost as if Joan had studied her own disappearance. From the very start, investigators debated what had happened. Was Joan attacked in her own home? Did she stage her own disappearance and run away? Or was this some elaborate suicide designed to look like murder? Each theory seemed possible, and yet none fit perfectly. Neighbors would remember that little Lillian kept repeating her innocent description. There was red paint in the kitchen. Mommy's gone. But everyone knew it wasn't paint. It was blood. And Joan Risch, devoted wife, loving mother, promising young woman, was nowhere to be found. What had happened in those 2 silent hours? Had she walked away from her life? Or had someone taken it from her? The mystery deepened with every clue. When police arrived at 75 Old Bedford Road on the night of October 24, 1961, they immediately realized this was no ordinary missing persons case. This was something darker, something stranger. The house wasn't ransacked. Nothing of value was missing. The children were unharmed. And yet, the blood told a chilling story. Detectives noted the kitchen was smeared with blood, but the volume didn't seem consistent with a fatal wound. There was blood on the floor, on the walls, even on the phone. It looked as though Joan had been injured, but had she walked out on her own? Or had someone carried her? The trail of drops through the house, into the driveway, ending abruptly, was baffling. One officer said, "It was as if she disappeared mid-step." Neighbors quickly came forward with what they had seen. Around 2:15 p.m., one neighbor spotted a strange blue car parked near the Risch home. Another saw a woman who looked like Joan walking along Old Bedford Road. She appeared disoriented, her clothes stained, and she was clutching something, perhaps a bundle or a towel. At the same time, a postal worker recalled seeing nothing unusual. The sightings conflicted. Some said they saw her alive. Others swore she must have been taken. The open phone book and bloodied phone were strange clues. Had Joan tried to call for help? Had she dialed a number and been interrupted? Phone records from that afternoon revealed Nothing. No completed calls. It was as if she had reached for the phone, bleeding, desperate, and never got the chance to speak. Detectives began to inventory what was missing from the house. One of Joan's aprons, a kitchen towel, her coat and purse were still inside. Her children's belongings were untouched. If she had planned to leave, why not take money, clothes, identification? The missing items suggested she had walked out in haste, or been carried out. Investigators soon learned about Joan's reading habits. In the weeks before she vanished, she had borrowed books about missing women, murder cases, a novel where a woman staged her own disappearance with blood as a ruse. This revelation stunned detectives. Had Joan been planning to vanish? Was she inspired by the stories she read? Or was it all just a chilling coincidence? By the end of the first week, police were split between three theories: murder or kidnapping. Joan had been attacked in her home and carried away. Staged disappearance. Joan had faked her own abduction, leaving behind blood and chaos to cover her tracks. Accident or breakdown. Joan may have suffered a mental collapse, wandered off injured, and met some unknown fate. But none of these theories explained everything. Every clue seemed to raise more questions than answers. Days turned into weeks. Search teams combed the woods, rivers, and roads around Lincoln. No body was ever found. No murder weapon. No trace of Joan. Just the memory of a blood-stained kitchen, 2 children left behind, and a mother who seemed to have walked into thin air. The investigation had only just begun. And soon, even stranger revelations would surface. In the days after Joan vanished, Lincoln, Massachusetts, a quiet New England town, became a place buzzing with rumors, sightings, and speculation. Everyone had a story. Everyone thought they knew what had happened. But the more people spoke, the stranger the case became. Multiple witnesses claimed they had seen a woman walking along Old Bedford Road on the very afternoon Joan disappeared. Some said she was disoriented, stumbling as if she were injured. Others swore she was holding something, perhaps a baby, perhaps a bundle of cloth. A few even thought she was barefoot, but the descriptions didn't always match Joan perfectly. Could it have been her? Or was it simply a case of mistaken identity? Neighbors continued to talk about the strange blue car parked near the Risch home that afternoon. No one recognized it. It didn't belong to any neighbor. And when police tried to track it, it had vanished without a trace. Some believed it belonged to a stranger, maybe a kidnapper. Others whispered it could have been someone Joan knew. Whoever drove that car has never been identified. Weeks later, a woman in a nearby airport claimed she saw someone who looked just like Joan, traveling under a different name. But when detectives followed up, there was no proof, no ticket, no luggage. Just another dead end. Speculation began about Joan's missing apron and towel. Had she used them to staunch a wound before leaving the house? Or had someone else used them to clean up after an attack? The fact that those items were never found haunted the investigation. And then, a chilling detail emerged. One of the library books Joan had checked out told the story of a woman who vanished, leaving only bloodstains behind. Was Joan trying to recreate what she had read? Had she staged her own disappearance, leaving her family, her life, her children? Or was this simply the darkest coincidence imaginable? As the weeks turned into months, the theories grew louder. Murder. Some were convinced Joan had been killed in her own home, and the killer carried her away. Kidnapping. Others believed she was taken alive, forced into that blue car. voluntary disappearance. A few even whispered that Joan had left on her own, running from her life. Inspired by the book she read, each theory carried its own weight. But none explained every clue, despite the theories. The searches and the sightings, one fact remained. No trace of Joan Risch was ever found, not her body, not her clothing, not even a footprint leading away from her blood-stained home. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed her whole. For the people of Lincoln, the disappearance became an obsession. Who was the woman seen stumbling along the road? What about the mysterious blue car? And why had Joan been so fascinated by stories of missing women in the weeks before her own vanishing? The questions piled higher. The answers slipped further away, and Joan's family was left trapped in the middle of a mystery that only grew darker with time. To understand Joan's vanishing, investigators began to look backward, deep into her past, because sometimes the answers to a disappearance aren't in the moment it happens, but in the scars carried from long before. Joan Carolyn Bard was born in 1930, but her childhood was not the picture-perfect innocence that she later created for her own children. When Joan was just a little girl, her family home burned to the ground. In the chaos of that fire, Joan's parents died. She was left orphaned, her childhood shattered overnight. After the fire, Joan was placed in foster care. Those who knew her then said she was quiet, reserved, and often withdrawn. A girl who carried her grief like an invisible weight. She grew up without the comfort of parents, without stability, without anyone to fully protect her. But Joan was smart. She worked hard, and she built a life for herself against the odds. Joan attended college and earned a degree in English literature. She loved books, stories of tragedy, mystery, and resilience. She began working in the publishing world, a bright and ambitious young woman. It was there she met Martin Risch, the man who would become her husband. Together, they built what looked like a normal, stable life: 2 children, a beautiful home, and the kind of suburban comfort Joan had never known as a child. But the ghosts of her past never truly left her. In the months before she vanished, Joan's library record revealed she had borrowed not just any books, but books specifically about women who faked their own deaths, cases of kidnapping, stories of mothers who vanished, leaving families behind. To some, this was harmless curiosity, but to investigators, it seemed as though Joan was either studying escape or unconsciously drawn to stories that mirrored her own hidden fears. Could Joan's childhood trauma have played a role in her disappearance? Some speculated she may have suffered a mental breakdown, that perhaps, seeing herself as trapped in suburban life, she ran, recreating the kind of stories she read. Others believed her trauma made her more vulnerable, that someone could have exploited her fragility and silenced her. When police dug into her past, they wondered, had Joan staged her own disappearance, finally breaking under the weight of her hidden pain? Had her fascination with missing women been a subconscious cry for help? Or was this all coincidence, a tragic alignment of her past traumas and her mysterious fate? The more investigators learned about Joan's past, the more the case blurred. The line between choice and crime. Did Joan walk away from her life, haunted by the shadows of her childhood? Or did her past simply make her the perfect victim, in the wrong place, at the wrong time? The truth was still out there. But the shadows of Joan's past only deepened the mystery of her present. By November of 1961, the quiet town of Lincoln, Massachusetts had been transformed. What began as the strange disappearance of a young housewife had now spiraled into a mystery that gripped the community, unsettled families, and divided opinions. Theories multiplied. Rumors spread like wildfire. And soon, Joan Risch's life became an open book for the entire town. Neighbors whispered in grocery stores, at church, and on playgrounds. Some pitied Martin and the children. Others pointed fingers. Everyone seemed to have their own version of the truth, but the theories that circulated shocked even investigators. The first and most obvious theory was murder. The blood in the kitchen, the trail to the driveway, the missing apron and towel, it all pointed to violence. But if Joan had been murdered in her home, where was the body? Why was nothing stolen? Why were the children left unharmed? And who could have done it in the middle of the day, in a quiet neighborhood, without being seen? Others believed Joan had been abducted. The strange blue car, the disoriented woman walking on the road, the sudden disappearance, all suggested someone had taken her. But again, no ransom note ever came. No demands. No explanation. If this was a kidnapping, it was unlike any the police had ever seen. The most shocking theory, and the one that haunted the case the most, was that Joan had staged the entire thing herself. Her library books told stories of women who disappeared, leaving only blood behind. Her troubled childhood hinted at unresolved trauma. Could Joan have deliberately left the bloodstains, walked out the door, and started a new life? Some neighbors whispered cruelly, she wanted out. She didn't want the life she had. But would a devoted mother really abandon her children? Another rumor shocked the town to its core. Some speculated Joan had secretly been pregnant, that perhaps she had sought out an illegal abortion, dangerous and hidden in the early 1960s. Blood, the missing towels, the apron. Could it have been evidence of a medical procedure gone horribly wrong? Had Joan died that afternoon, her body quietly disposed of by someone she trusted? This theory was never proven. But it unsettled everyone. And finally, some believed Joan had simply suffered a mental breakdown, that her past traumas, her suburban isolation, and perhaps unspoken struggles had pushed her over the edge. Maybe she wandered off, dazed and bleeding, collapsing somewhere no one ever found. But search teams scoured every inch of Lincoln. No body was ever recovered. The case became a mirror, reflecting people's own fears, prejudices, and secrets. Some clung to the idea of murder. Others believed she had walked away. And still others thought it was something far stranger. But all agreed on one thing. Joan Risch's disappearance was unlike anything they had ever seen before. As the years passed, the case went cold. But the rumors never stopped. Every strange car, every unidentified woman, every whisper of scandal would bring Joan's name back to life. And soon, decades later, the case would resurface, not as a memory, but as one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. When Joan vanished on that October afternoon in 1961, she left behind more than just a blood-stained kitchen. She left behind a husband who adored her, 2 children too young to understand what had happened, and a family caught in a storm of rumors, suspicions, and heartbreak. For Martin, life split in two on that day. On the morning of October 24th, he had kissed his wife goodbye, boarded a plane, and thought about business meetings in New York. By the evening, he was back home, standing in a kitchen smeared with blood, with police swarming his house, and his wife gone without a trace. Martin never believed Joan left voluntarily. To him, The very idea that she would abandon her children was unthinkable. He insisted until the day he died that something terrible had happened to her. But the ones most deeply affected were the children. Lillian, just 4 years old, became forever marked by that haunting memory. She was the one who told neighbors. There was red paint in the kitchen. But as she grew older, that memory faded, blurred by time, trauma, and silence. David, only 2, was too young to remember anything at all. But he grew up in the shadow of a mystery he could never escape. 2 children left without a mother, raised under a cloud of whispers that never fully went away. In the years that followed, Martin tried to give his children a normal life. He kept his job, raised them in the same home, and avoided talking too much about Joan's disappearance. But the house never felt the same. The bloodstains were scrubbed away, the kitchen cleaned. But the absence lingered. There were birthdays without her. Christmas mornings where her chair sat empty. First days of school where other mothers stood proudly. And Joan's children stood without theirs. Some in Lincoln pitied Martin. Others quietly judged him. There were always whispers. Maybe he knew more than he admitted. Maybe Joan left because of him. Though police never suspected him of wrongdoing, the shadow of suspicion lingered. Martin endured it in silence, carrying on for the sake of his children, for the Risch family. Silence was the loudest sound of all. Every night, Martin tucked his children into bed, not knowing if their mother was alive or dead. Every milestone reminded them of the gaping hole she left behind. The case was never solved. But the pain never ended. Those who knew the family said Martin grew more withdrawn in the years after Joan's disappearance. The laughter that once filled the home was quieter. The weight of unanswered questions hung heavy in every room, and for Lillian and David, the mystery of their mother became part of their identity. They weren't just children. They were the children of the missing woman. As the years turned into decades, Joan's case faded from headlines. But for her family, it never faded from memory. Every time a body was found, every time a missing woman was reported, they wondered, could it be Joan? The family was left with only questions, grief, and the faint hope that someday, somehow, the truth would surface. But in the absence of answers, rumors continued to swirl, some darker than ever before. In the weeks after Joan Risch disappeared, Lincoln was consumed with fear. But as weeks turned into months, and months into years, the case went cold. No body was ever found. No suspect was ever charged. And Joan's name slowly slipped from newspaper headlines into the shadows of unsolved mysteries. By 1962, police had run out of leads. The blood evidence told a story, but not the whole story. The supposed sightings went nowhere, and every theory remained unproven. For the authorities, there was simply nothing more to do. But for the people of Lincoln, the mystery never faded. Even as the years passed, whispers continued. Some swore they saw Joan living in another state under a new name. Others believed her body was buried in the woods, waiting to be discovered. And a few insisted that she had been taken by someone powerful, someone untouchable. Every time human remains were discovered in Massachusetts, Joan's name resurfaced. But each time, the hope for answers was crushed. It was never her. For decades, the official police files sat gathering dust. Then, in the 1970s and again in the 1990s, new detectives reopened the case. They reviewed the witness statements. They re-examined the photographs of bloodstains. They even consulted modern forensic experts, but the evidence was too old, Too degraded, too incomplete. Science could not answer what time had stolen. Each reopening of the case sparked fresh debate. Some detectives leaned toward the staged disappearance theory, pointing to Joan's library books. Others believed firmly in foul play, pointing to the blood and the missing items. And a few saw signs of a botched medical procedure, a secret Joan may have carried to her grave. But with no new evidence, every theory remained only speculation. Joan's family, every phone call from police was a flicker of hope. We may have something new. We're rechecking the files. But each time, the hope ended in silence. The truth always remained just out of reach. By the turn of the century, Joan's disappearance was no longer just a local mystery. It had become part of America's library of unsolved crimes, a story whispered on true crime shows, studied by amateur sleuths, and dissected in online forums. But the reality remained the same. A young mother walked out of her home one October afternoon in 1961 and was never seen again. The decades had buried evidence, silenced witnesses, and stolen opportunities for truth. But what time could not bury was the haunting question. Did Joan Risch vanish because of her own choices? Or because someone else decided her fate? And as the years slipped by, one final question lingered in the cold case files. Was the truth still out there? Or had it disappeared with Joan forever? By the 1990s, more than 30 years had passed since Joan Risch vanished. For many, it was just another cold case lost in dusty files. But then, true crime began to capture America's imagination. Books, television shows, and later the internet brought Joan's name back into the spotlight. And suddenly, the quiet mystery of a housewife in Massachusetts became a story the whole country debated. When programs like Unsolved Mysteries and Cold Case Files gained popularity, Joan's disappearance was exactly the kind of haunting story audiences craved. A devoted mother, a blood-stained kitchen, a trail of clues that ended in nothing. Millions of viewers were introduced to the case for the first time. And with every broadcast, new theories emerged. By the early 2000s, online forums became filled with people dissecting every detail of Joan's life. Some insisted she had been murdered by a stranger. Others argued she staged her disappearance with frightening precision. A few believed she had been the victim of a cover-up, that someone in power knew the truth and buried it. Amateur detectives created timelines, analyzed photographs of the bloodstains, and even drove to Lincoln to retrace Joan's last known steps. The mystery had found a second life. Writers, journalists, and true crime authors all turned to Joan's case. Some framed it as a tragic cold case. Others portrayed it as a chilling puzzle. A woman who may have orchestrated her own vanishing. Documentaries revisited the Risch home, interviewing surviving neighbors and investigators. The haunting image of the tidy suburban house with children's toys still in the yard left audiences unsettled. Advances in DNA testing offered a glimmer of hope. Could the dried blood samples from the kitchen reveal something new? Unfortunately, the samples had degraded too much over time. Technology had advanced, but the evidence had slipped away decades earlier. What struck many was how ordinary Joan's life seemed. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't involved in crime. She was a housewife, a mother, a neighbor, the kind of woman people trusted to watch their children or bring over a casserole. And yet, her life ended in the most extraordinary way, a disappearance so baffling it defied explanation. This ordinary to extraordinary transformation fascinated the public, because if Joan could vanish, who couldn't? The renewed attention kept Joan's story alive. But it also raised new fears. Was Joan's case proof that even in the safety of suburban America, you could disappear without a trace? That even in your own kitchen, you were never truly safe? As modern sleuths debated, one haunting truth remained. No matter how much attention the case received, the answers never came. The spotlight illuminated the story. But the shadows of October 24, 1961, still held the secret. More than 60 years have passed since October 24, 1961, the day Joan Risch walked out of her suburban home in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and never returned. Her children are now grown. Her husband has long since passed. The house where she lived has new owners, who may not even know the dark history hidden in its walls. But the mystery of Joan Risch still lingers, a ghost story woven into the fabric of American true crime. For Martin Risch, life ended without resolution. He never remarried. He raised his children, but the shadow of Joan's absence was always there. Those who knew him said he never stopped believing she was taken against her will. For Lillian and David, growing up without their mother was a wound that never fully healed. Every holiday, every milestone, carried the weight of her absence. They were left with fragments, stories of who she was, whispers of who she might have been, but never the comfort of knowing what truly happened. Joan Risch was 31 years old. When she disappeared, to those who remember her, she will always be that age. A young wife, a devoted mother, a woman with books by her bedside, a baby in her arms, and a future that should have stretched out for decades. Instead, she became a question mark. Her story frozen in the moment of her disappearance. The world has changed since 1961. Forensics have advanced. Society has evolved. But Joan's case remains unsolved. Her name still appears in books, podcasts, documentaries, and internet forums. Her disappearance continues to fascinate because it represents something everyone fears: the idea that you can vanish, even from the safety of your own home, leaving behind no answers, only questions. Did Joan suffer an accident and wander away? Did she stage her own disappearance, inspired by the book she read? Or was she silenced by someone, a stranger, or perhaps someone she knew? No one knows, and perhaps no one ever will. But the legacy of Joan Risch is not just in the mystery, it is in the reminder that every person carries hidden depths, that even the most ordinary life can hold extraordinary secrets, and that behind every headline, there is a family that still aches for answers. As the sun sets on Lincoln, Massachusetts, the quiet streets look unchanged. Children still play. Families still gather around dinner tables. But for those who know the story, there's always a chill in the air. Because somewhere, on a crisp October afternoon in 1961, a woman stepped into history and into the unknown, and the question that has haunted generations remains: what really happened to Joan Risch?